Hey guys, and welcome to this long and advanced Dragonknight tank guide, where I'll teach you everything there is to know about the DK tank. If you're looking for something shorter and simpler, make sure to check out the beginner DK tank guide, or the general beginner tank guide instead. This guide is also already on my website, so if you prefer written guides over YouTube videos, you can read it there instead. Dragonknights have access to an absurd amount of useful tools when it comes to tanking. They have access to hardened armor, a very strong and at the same time extremely cheap damage shield, which shields you for 31% of your max HP while costing only 2600 magicka. They also have access to Helping Hands, a passive which restores your stamina whenever you use an Earthen Heart ability, which you'll be proccing with Ignis Shield, and it will trivialize sustaining stamina, which is why DK is such an easy and beginner friendly class. The Iron Skin and Scaled Armor passives grant you block mitigation and armor, which are extremely important stats for a tank. Dragonknights also provide a unique stagger debuff, which increases the target's damage taken, a unique Engulfing Flames debuff, which increases enemies' flame damage taken, and the unique Minor Brutality buff, which increases the group's weapon damage by 10%. We'll start off by going over all skills that can be useful for tanking, even the extremely situational ones, and ESO has many skill lines. This section will be rather long, so feel free to use the timestamps. Starting off with the Dragonknight's 3 skill lines, Ardent Flame, Draconic Power, and Earthen Heart. We're gonna start off with the Draconic Power, as this skill line has the most useful abilities when it comes to tanking. Spiked Armor grants Major Resolve for 20 seconds, boosting armor by almost 6000. A crucial tank buff that should always be active. While it also deals damage to attackers, the scaling is negligible, so focus on the defensive value instead. Other sources like Balance or Warden's Expansive Frostcloak can also provide the same buff, but this skill gets better when you morph it. Hardened Armor grants a strong damage shield, absorbing 31% of your max health for 6 seconds, at a low cost compared to similar skills. While less effective against blockable direct damage, it excels against dots, making it a spammable alternative to burst heals like Coagulating Blood in dot-heavy encounters. Dark Talons immobilizes enemies within 6 meters, deals minor damage, and allows allies to activate the Ignite synergy for decent damage. However, bosses and elite mobs are immune to immobilization and the synergy, making this skill useful only against regular trash mobs. The Burning Talons morph additionally applies a 5-second dot, even to enemies who cannot be immobilized. The Choking Talons morph reduces the skill's cost and applies Minor Maim to enemies. However, since Minor Maim is a common debuff, likely already applied from other sources, the choice between this morph and the Burning Talons comes down to whether you prefer the reduced cost or additional damage over time, with Minor Maim being a less critical factor. Dragon Blood heals for 33% of your missing health, and grants Major Fortitude for 20 seconds, increasing health recovery by 30%. However, this buff is often redundant, as it can also come from potions. Green Dragon Blood retains its original healing effect, healing 33% of your missing health, while also granting Major Endurance and Minor Vitality for 20 seconds. Major Endurance increases stamina recovery by 30%, but since you're already getting it from potions, it's not really needed here. Minor Vitality increases healing received by 8%, but this is typically covered by healers wearing the Ozazan set in 12-man content. This morph also struggles against healing absorb mechanics, as it only starts healing effectively when you're already low on HP, when it's already too late to deal with the healing absorb. Coagulating Blood is the superior morph in most situations. Instead of healing for 33% of your missing health, it restores 12.9% of your max stamina or magicka, plus 136% of your weapon or spell damage, scaling up to 50% more based on your missing health. This makes it both stronger and more reliable. Green Dragon Blood, on the other hand, heals based on missing health, which is ineffective against healing absorb mechanics. When you're at full HP, Green Dragon Blood can't out-heal these mechanics, leaving you without a reliable heal. Protective Scale reduces damage from projectiles by 50% for 6 seconds. While it has strong potential, it's situational and not ideal for most encounters. It's outclassed by defensive stance against a single, powerful projectile, and by Mist Form if you're a vampire. However, it's best option when facing a constant stream of projectiles. The Protective Plate morph grants immunity to snares and immobilizations for 4 seconds, and slightly reduces the ability's cost, making it the better choice in most situations. Dragon Fire Scale morph hurls fiery orbs back at the attackers, dealing minor damage up to once every half second. While it won't deal significant damage with your tank stats, It can be useful if you don't need the snare immunity from the other morph, and can manage the slightly higher cost. However, if you're unsure, the Protective Plate morph is the safer choice. Inhale deals flame damage to all enemies within an 8-meter radius, and heals you for 100% of the damage done. If you hit any enemies, you'll explode again after 2.5 seconds, dealing twice the damage, though this second explosion doesn't heal you. Deep Breath makes the first part of the ability interrupt all enemies, and increases the damage of the second part. It's very useful in encounters with multiple enemies that require interrupts, such as Trashbacks in the Infinite Archive, but it's situational and not essential for most fights. Draw Essence increases the healing from the first part of the skill, healing for 150% of the damage done, instead of 100%. It also restores 10% of the ability's cost for each enemy hit by the second part, the explosion. As a tank, you're less concerned with the damage you're doing, which is why Deep Breath's higher damage output is less relevant. Instead, Draw Essence offers 50% more healing and better sustain, but at the cost of not interrupting enemies. It's a good self-heal option in fights with multiple enemies, where the interrupt from Deep Breath isn't necessary. Now moving on to passives. Iron Skin increases your block mitigation by 10%. On its own, this might not seem significant, but when combined with other block mitigation bonuses available to all classes, it can make a massive difference. For example, with all bonuses applied, you'll reach 82% block mitigation, meaning you'll only take 18% of the damage you would otherwise. Adding Iron Skin increases this to 87%, reducing damage from blocked hits by about 28% compared to classes like Arcanists or Necromancers with similar builds. Burning Heart increases your healing receipt by 12%, while any Draconic power ability is active. You don't need to actively manage it, as it should always be up, thanks to Hardened Armor and Coagulating Blood. Elder Dragon increases your health recovery by 258 for each Draconic power ability slotted. While health recovery is generally a less impactful stat, especially for vampires, it still provides free healing, no matter how small. Scaled Armor increases your armor by 1650, which translates to about 2.5% damage mitigation at 0 armor. However, due to armor's increasing returns, it provides something closer to 4.75% mitigation when you have around 30,000 armor. Reaching the armor cap of 33,000 is crucial for tougher fights, so this passive grants you flexibility in other parts of your build. Now moving on to the Earthen Heart skill line. The first skill is Stone Fist, a simple damaging ability. Its importance lies in one of its morphs, so let's move straight to that so I can explain why it's useful. Stone Giant is the signature ability for Dragonknight tanks. It applies the Stagger debuff, which increases enemy damage taken by 65 per stack, up to 3 stacks. This adds 195 extra damage per instance of damage, providing a massive boost in group content where damage dealers have multiple dots ticking on the boss. The first cast is a stomp with a 0.6 second cast time, causing you to drop block, so timing is crucial to avoid heavy attacks. The next 3 casts within 12 seconds are single target projectiles, with a 28-meter range, cast instantly and safely. Molten Weapons grants all allies within a 28-meter radius Major Brutality and Major Sorcery for 36 seconds, boosting weapon and spell damage by 20%. While these buffs are essential for damage dealers, this skill is just one of many sources. In most cases, it won't be needed, since teammates typically gain these buffs from weapon power or spell power potions. However, using Molten Weapons to provide Major Brutality and Sorcery frees teammates to use other potions, like Tristat or Heroism potions, for additional sustain or ultigen. The Ignis Weapons morph doubles the duration of Major Brutality and Sorcery to 72 seconds, making it the superior choice for tanks, as the alternative morph offers no useful benefits. The extended duration also allows PC players with skill swapping add-ons to pre-buff this ability before a fight, and then swap it out for another skill. Obsidian Shield grants a damage shield to you and up to 6 allies within 12 meters, equal to 8% of your maximum health, and provides Major Mending for 3 seconds, boosting your healing down by 16%. While it might seem situational, this skill is a staple for Dragonknight tanks in most fights, due to its synergy with the Helping Hands passive, which restores stamina whenever an Earthen Heart ability is cast. The Fragmented Shield morph extends the duration of Major Mending from 3 seconds to 8 seconds. However, this increased duration is typically less valuable than the stronger damage shield provided by the Ignis Shield morph. The Ignis Shield morph increases the damage shield on yourself from 8% to 20% of your maximum health, making it the stronger choice for most situations. Ash Cloud creates a small AoE on the ground that heals you and your allies for 1.9% of your max stamina or magicka, plus 19.7% of your weapon or spell damage every second, while also slowing enemies by 70%. The skill drains 351 magicka per second, but with reduced magicka cost, or reduced Trico's enchants, the cost is reduced to 0, making it always free to use. The Cinderstorm morph increases the healing to 2.9% of your max stamina or magicka, plus 30.5% of your weapon or spell damage, making it about 50% stronger than the base morph. This makes Cinderstorm the better choice. Magma Armor caps the damage of every hit you take to 3% of your max health, effectively making you immortal for 12 seconds. While this is overpowered, you'll generally want to spend your ultimate points on group buffs, such as Aggressive Horn. However, Magma Armor can serve as a valuable emergency ultimate if things go wrong. When paired with Sys immunity, such as Immovable Potions or the Immovable skill, it allows you to safely resurrect teammates and recover from situations that would otherwise lead to a wipe. The Magma Shell morph additionally grants your teammates within 8 meters a damage shield, equal to 100% of their maximum health for 10 seconds. This makes it the preferred morph, as it provides significant team utility, in addition to your own survival. Now moving on to passives. Eternal Mountain increases the duration of your Erdenhard abilities by 20%. This has already been accounted for in my previous descriptions. For instance, when I mentioned that Igneous Weapons grants Major Brutality and Sorcery for 72 seconds, that's with Eternal Mountain factored in, as the base duration is 60 seconds. Battle Roar restores 50 health, stamina, and magicka per ultimate point spent whenever you use an ultimate ability. This is a great sustain boost for tanks, especially since you'll typically have increased ultimate generation from sources like the Decisive Weapon trait or the Nord's Stalwart Racial, allowing you to get even more value out of it. Mountain's Blessing has two parts. The first grants minor brutality to you and your allies for 20 seconds when you use an Erdenhard ability, increasing weapon damage by 10%. It's the only reliable source of this buff, and with Igneous Shield used frequently, you'll usually maintain it without thinking about it. The second part provides 3 ultimate when you use an Erdenhard ability, up to once every 6 seconds. This boosts your ultimate generation, and between Stone Giant and Igneous Shield casts, you'll usually trigger it on cooldown. Helping Hand restores 1120 stamina whenever you use an Erdenhard ability that costs at least 1120 magicka. This means that abilities like Stone Giant and Cinderstorm won't trigger it, but you'll be activating it frequently with Igneous Shield and occasionally with Igneous Weapons. This passive significantly improves stamina sustain, and is one of the reasons Dragoknights are considered beginner-friendly for tanking. Moving on to the Ardent Flame skill line. Lava Whip is just a simple spammable, but one of its morphs has a very niche use case. Molten Whip grants up to 300 bonus weapon and spell damage, after using other Ardent Flame abilities. This means you can slot it on your back bar, even if you don't intend to actively use it. The bonus weapon and spell damage can enhance the strength of your heals and, more importantly, help you reach the required weapon and spell damage threshold for the Engulfing Flames ability. Searing Strike applies a 24-second damage over time effect to an enemy, dealing flame damage. The initial hit also applies the Burning Stance effect, which triggers the Combustion passive. This passive restores magicka and stamina, effectively reducing the overall cost of using this ability. The Burning Embers morph heals you for 100% of the damage dealt, which can be a useful source of healing in fights with multiple bosses. However, Structured Entropy is generally better in that situation, and it's usually difficult to fit both abilities into your loadout. The primary use of Burning Embers is to provide a consistent source of flame damage, which is crucial for proccing the Encratis' Behemoth set, a monster set that increases your group's flame damage dealt and reduces flame damage taken. To keep Encratis' Behemoth active, you need a steady source of flame damage, and Burning Embers serves this role well. Fiery Breath is a 24-second flame dot applied in a cone in front of you. The Engulfing Flames morph increases enemies' flame damage taken by up to 6%. This scales with your weapon and spell damage, and it reaches the 6% value when your combined weapon and spell damage are 9000. This is a value that's a bit difficult to reach as a tank, and you need to change your build a bit to reach it. But it isn't really necessary, because optimized groups will always want a Dragonknight damage dealer to run the Zen set, and this damage dealer can use Engulfing Flames at its full strength. And in non-optimized groups, you really shouldn't care about bumping up your Engulfing Flames bonus from 5% to 6%. By sacrificing survivability in other parts of your build. Noxious Breath turns the skill into a stamina ability that deals poison damage and applies Major Breach for 24 seconds. Major Breach is important, but there are better ways to apply it. For single target, Pierce Armor and Elemental Susceptibility work better. For AoE, Razor Caltrops is a stronger option. But since it's from a PvP skill line, Noxious Breath can be a decent replacement if you haven't ranked up Assault to level 6 yet. Fiery Grip pulls and taunts an enemy, granting Major Expedition for 4 seconds. Increasing movement speed by 30%. It's key for grouping enemies in rush fights, but it gets outclassed by the scrubbing alternative, Leashing Soul. The Unrelenting Grip morph refunds its entire cost if the enemy cannot be pulled. For example, if the target is too large or has been stunned or chained recently. This means you can use it as a free range taunt, since elite adds can never be chained. However, its range is 22 meters, shorter than proper taunts, which have a range of 28 meters, and you cannot get 100% uptime of taunt with this alone, as you can only reapply taunt with it after it has already dropped off again. Now moving on to passives. Combustion increases the damage of your burning and poison stats effects by 33%. It also restores 1000 stamina and magicka when either poisoned or burning procs, with a 3-second cooldown. This passive is a solid sustain boost, and you'll frequently proc it with elemental susceptibility. Warmth slows enemies by 30% after being hit by an Ardent Flame ability. This is especially useful when chaining enemies with Unrelenting Grip, as it makes it harder for them to escape the stack. If you've unlocked Scribing and are using Leashing Soul instead of Unrelenting Grip, this effect becomes less important. Searing Heat boosts the damage over time of Fiery Breath, Searing Strike, and Dragonknight Standard by 25%, while also increasing their duration by 4 seconds. This has already been accounted for in the descriptions of those abilities. For example, Fiery Breath and Searing Strike have a 20-second duration at base, but with this passive, they last 24 seconds. World in Ruin increases your flame and poison damage by 5%. If you're tight on skill points, you can skip it temporarily, as it's not crucial for tanking. Now moving on to weapon skill lines, and starting off the one-handed and shield. Puncture is a melee taunt that damages your target within 7 meters, causes them to attack you, and applies Major Breach, reducing enemy armor by 5948 for 15 seconds, providing around a 13% damage increase. This debuff is essential. Puncture isn't always needed, but you always need a source of Major Breach, like elemental susceptibility. Additionally, using the Puncturing Remedy set can cause your puncture to heal you. The morph you want to use here is Spear's Armor, which provides Minor Breach in addition to Major Breach. This reduces enemies' armor by 2974, further increasing the group's damage against them. Low Slash provides Minor Maim, which can be easily obtained from other sources, so it's not particularly useful. Heroic Slash applies Minor Maim and provides Minor Heroism for 15 seconds, granting 10 ultimate per cast. While this can be useful, in most situations you won't have the bar space for it. Defensive Posture grants a 31% max health damage shield for 6 seconds, and reflects one projectile that would hit you. It's especially useful in encounters like Locestis, where you can reflect his frostbolts from range, and in the Infinite Archive, against Daedroths, where reflecting their firebolts one-shots them. This skill can be a game changer in specific fights, making it a valuable tool for your toolkit. Defensive Stance is the better morph, reducing the cost of your block and increasing your block mitigation by 10%. It's crucial for fights with lots of blockable direct damage, providing both better sustain and increased survivability. Power Bash is used to proc the Void Bash 2-piece set, which pulls enemies to you and applies Major Maim, reducing their damage down by 10% for 10 seconds. This set is helpful in trash fights for stacking enemies quickly. The morph choice doesn't matter, and it's fine to leave the ability unmorphed. Shield Wall is a decent defensive ultimate, though it gets trampled by Magma Shell, which is a straight up better defensive emergency ultimate. The only use case for it is when difficult phases happen so frequently, you don't have the time to generate 200 ultimate for Magma Shell. Now moving on to passives. Fortress reduces the stamina cost of one-handed and shield abilities by 15% and block cost by 36%, which provides a significant stamina management boost. Sword and Board increases your weapon and spell damage by 5%, boosting your healing, and it increases your block mitigation by 20%. Deadly Bash increases your bash damage by 500 and reduces its cost by 50%. It's a nice bonus, but low priority, so you can skip it if you're short on skill points. Deflect Bolts grants 14% additional block mitigation, but only against projectiles. Battlefield Mobility reduces the movement speed penalty of blocking by 40%, allowing you to move faster than if you're blocking with a different weapon type. Now moving on to the Destruction Staff skill line. Crushing Shock, which is a morph of the Force Shock skill, will be essential in some fights. It's because Crushing Shock can be used as a ranged interrupt, interrupting enemies who are channeling their abilities, just like a bash, except it has a 28 meter range. This will be incredibly helpful in fights where the enemy is channeling mechanics from far away, and you need to interrupt them quickly. Wall of Elements is absolutely essential, and you'll always have it in your skill setup. It places an AoE in front of you for 10 seconds, dealing a small amount of damage, granting your allies a damage shield against projectiles, and applying a 40% slow and Minor Breach for 4 seconds to enemies that are chilled. Minor Breach provides 2974 penetration, and combined with shield procs from elemental susceptibility, this skill will maintain 100% uptime on minor breach. The main reason you'll need Wall of Elements in every skill setup is that every weapon skill applies enchantments of the weapons being used with. You will want to use the Crusher enchantment on your Ice Staff, which combined with the infused weapon trait will reduce your enemy's armor by 2108 for 5 seconds, with a 5-second cooldown. Since Wall of Elements ticks every second, it will constantly proc Crusher whenever it's off cooldown, providing 100% uptime on that armor debuff. You'll want to use the Elemental Blockade morph, which increases the size of the AoE and extends its duration from 10 to 15 seconds. Unstable Wall of Elements also has its uses. It provides a damage shield when it expires, allowing you to spam it and constantly apply a decent damage shield against projectiles to your teammates. This can be useful in fights like the Black Rose Prison Arena or against the Necromancers in the Zorin fight in Lucent Citadel. Destructive Clench, which is a morph of Destructive Touch, is a range taunt with a 28 meter range that applies the Chilled stats effect. It also applies Minor Maim for 4 seconds and Minor Brittle for 4 seconds, if you're wielding an Ice Staff. Minor Maim is easily obtained from other sources, while Minor Brittle can be useful if you don't have an Arcanist in your group, casting Rune of the Coreless Pool. The key benefit of Destructive Clench, however, is that it applies Major Maim for 5 seconds, reducing enemies' damage by 10%. This is a significant survivability boost for you and your team, and Destructive Clench is one of its best sources, second only to Shield Throw, which provides Major Maim for 10 seconds instead. Weakness to Elements applies Major Breach to your enemy for 30 seconds, reducing their armor by 5948, providing a big damage increase for your team. Elemental Susceptibility is an extremely strong skill. It applies Major Breach and triggers Burning, Chilled, and Concussed stats effects every 7.5 seconds. Burning procs Combustion, restoring 1000 stamina and magicka. Chilled ensures 100% uptime on Minor Breach from Elemental Blockade, and procs Minor Brittle if you were on your Ice Staff bar the moment it procced. Concussed provides 53% uptime on Minor Vulnerability, which increases enemies' damage taken by 5%, and can trigger Off Balance when combined with Lightning Elemental Blockade, benefiting damage dealers who use the Exploiter champion point. You can also recast this skill for free whenever you have nothing else to do, to reapply Minor Brittle for 4 seconds. Impulse causes an explosion around you, dealing frost damage and applying minor protection to your allies for 6 seconds, reducing their damage taken by 5%. Pulsar additionally inflicts Minor Mangle on small enemies, reducing their maximum health by 10%. This usually isn't that useful because it can only be applied to small enemies, who would have died in the AoEs regardless. However, the game isn't consistent and sometimes you can mangle bigger enemies, like Bone Colossi or Gargoyles. Additionally, the Pulsar morph triples the chance to proc stats effects. When combined with the Charge trait on your Ice Staff, you will have 69.75% chance to proc the Chilled stats effect on every enemy around you. This in turn synergizes with your Elemental Blockade, as chilled enemies inside it will be debuffed with Minor Breach, reducing their armor by 2174. Moving into passives. The Trifocus passive can be a detriment to your sustain. It causes heavy attacks to grant a damage shield and makes blocking cost magicka instead of stamina when wielding an Ice Staff. While the damage shield is useful, the downside is that blocking with Trifocus holds magicka recovery instead of stamina recovery. And since most of your abilities rely on magicka, using Trifocus can result in magicka shortages and leave you with nothing to spend your stamina on. The Penetrating Magic passive makes your Destruction Staff abilities ignore 2974 spell resistance, so it isn't essential for tanking. Elemental Force increases your chance to proc stats effects by 100%, and it's crucial to have. Ancient Knowledge reduces your block cost by 36%, and increases your block mitigation by 20%, turning Ice Staff into a proper tanking weapon. Destruction Expert restores 3600 magicka when you get a killing blow with a Destruction Staff ability, and 1800 magicka every 10 seconds when you absorb damage with a Destruction Staff damage shield. While you won't be getting many killing blows as a tank, you will restore magicka from the damage shields applied by Wall of Elements. Moving on to the heavy armor skill line. Immovable, which is a morph of Unstoppable, is critical for certain encounters, such as Zalvaka in Rogrove or Archdruid Devrick in Erdenroot Enclave. It grants 5% block mitigation and increases snare strength by 5% per heavy armor piece for 6 seconds, matching the duration of its crowd control immunity. This makes it ideal to activate just before a powerful blockable attack. However, Using it with 7 heavy armor pieces will cause the snare strength to reach 100%, fully immobilizing you and preventing dodge rolls. Each piece of heavy armor also does the following: reduces damage taken from martial attacks by 1%, increases the amount of damage blocked by 1%, increases damage done with bash by 30%, and reduces your damage taken while immune to crowd control by 1%. It also has some innate penalties. Each piece of heavy armor increases damage taken from magical attacks by 1%, reduces the movement speed bonus of sprint by 1%, increases the cost of roll dodge by 3%, and increases the size of your detection area while sneaking by 10%. Now moving on to the passives. You'll want to get all of them. Resolve increases your armor by 343 for each piece of heavy armor equipped. Constitution increases your health recovery by 4% and causes you to restore 108 magicka and stamina when you take damage for each piece of heavy armor equipped, with a 4-second cooldown. Juggernaut increases your max health by 2% for each piece of heavy armor equipped. Revitalize increases the magicka and stamina restored by your heavy attacks by 4% for each piece of heavy armor worn. And Rapid Mending increases your healing received by 1% for each piece of heavy armor. Now moving on to the medium armor. Elude, which is a morph of evasion, can be useful in certain encounters, such as off-tanking in Asylum Sanctorium. It grants major evasion, reducing AoE damage taken by 20%, and provides major expedition for 3 seconds when hit by a direct AoE attack, increasing your movement speed by 30%. Unlike other armor types, medium armor has only bonuses, no penalties. Each piece of medium armor does the following: reduces the cost of sprint by 1%, reduces the cost of sneak by 5%, reduces the cost of block by 3%, reduces damage taken from AoE attacks by 2% for 2 seconds after you use roll dodge, and increases movement speed by 2% while immune to crowd control. As for the passives, you'll want to have all of them except of improved sneak. Dexterity increases your critical damage and healing done by 2% for each piece of medium armor equipped. Windwalker increases your stamina recovery by 4% and reduces the stamina cost of your abilities by 2% per piece of medium armor equipped. Improved sneak reduces the cost of sneak by 7% and reduces the size of your detection area while sneaking by 5% for each piece of medium armor equipped. Agility increases your weapon and spell damage by 2% for each piece of medium armor. And Athletics increases the movement speed bonus of sprint by 3% and reduces the cost of roll dodge by 4% for each piece of medium armor. Moving on to the light armor skill line. Each piece of light armor provides these bonuses: reduces damage taken from magical attacks by 1%, reduces the cost of roll dodge by 3%, reduces the movement speed penalty of sneak by 5%, reduces the cost of break free by 5%, and reduces the cost of bash by 3%. As for the penalties, each piece of light armor increases damage taken from martial attacks by 1%, increases the cost of block by 3%, and decreases damage done with bash by 1%. Now as for the passives. Grace reduces the effectiveness of snares by 4% and reduces the cost of sprint by 3% for each piece of light armor. Evocation increases your magicka recovery by 4% and reduces the magicka cost of your abilities by 2% for each piece of light armor. Spell warding increases your spell resistance by 726 for each piece of light armor. Prodigy increases your weapon and spell critical rating by 219 for each piece of light armor. And Concentration increases your penetration by 939 for each piece of light armor. Concentration is the one passive you can skip if you don't have abundance of skill points. Moving on to the Fighter's Guild skill line. Silver Leash, which is a morph of silver bolts, pulls an enemy towards you, snares them, and taunts them if they haven't already been taunted. While it's outclassed by Leashing Soul and Unrelenting Grip, it can still be useful in specific situations, like when facing a negate mechanic that disables magic abilities, making Silver Leash your only option. The Ring of Preservation, which is a morph of Circle of Protection, creates a circle on the ground for 10 seconds, healing you and your allies inside for 1.9% of your maximum stamina or magicka, plus 19.7% of your weapon or spell damage. Its primary use is similar to Cinderstorm, but Cinderstorm is about 50% stronger, lasts longer, and has no cost in this build. Because of this, Ring of Preservation rarely fits into your skill bar. However, if you can find space for it, it provides a nice additional heal over time. Moving on to passives. Fighter's Guild passives work only if you have a Fighter's Guild ability slotted, so most of the time, you won't need any of them, but if you do end up using them, you'll definitely want the Intimidating Presence, which reduces the stamina cost of your fighter's guild abilities by 15%. Slayer passive will increase your weapon and spell damage by 3% for each fighter's guild ability slotted. This can boost your healing abilities, such as Resolving Vigor. It's something you want to get only when you have spare skill points, and there's no point in getting it at all if you don't plan on using fighter's guild abilities. Banish the Wicked grants you 3 ultimate whenever you kill an enemy. Getting more ultimate is nice, but Banish the Wicked only works when you land killing blows, which won't happen much as a tank. Plus, it requires a fighter's guild ability slotted, and you will rarely have a room for that in your setup. Moving on to Mage's Guild. Structured Entropy, which is a morph of Entropy, applies a 20-second damage over time effect to an enemy, extended to 22 seconds with the Everlasting Magic passive. Every 2 seconds, it heals you for 1.9% of your max stamina or magicka, plus 19.7% of your weapon or spell damage. Its strength lies in the ability to stack it up on multiple enemies, letting you build up a lot of healing over time. While it's not a staple ability, it can be extremely useful in fights like the first boss of Treadsail Reef. Equilibrium lets you trade health for magicka, which can help improve your magicka sustain. However, using it reduces the strength of your healing and damage shields by 50% for 4 seconds, so it's something you will need to use carefully. The Balance Morph grants you Mage Resolve for 32 seconds, which allows you to use this skill as a replacement for Hardened Armor in fights with mostly direct damage and no dots. The Spell Symmetry Morph reduces the cost of your next magicka ability by 33%, so it's the better option if you want the additional magicka sustain from Equilibrium, but also want to keep using Hardened Armor for its damage shield. If you plan on using any Mage's Guild abilities, you should get the Mage Adept, Everlasting Magic, and Magicka Controller passives. Moving on to the Psijic Order skill line. Race Against Time, which is a morph of Accelerate, removes snares and immobilizations and gives you 2 seconds of immunity to them. It's really helpful when off-tanking Navintas, for example, since the statues in that fight apply a stacking snare that can lock you in place. You can use Race Against Time to get rid of it, and get Major Expedition, which boosts your movement speed by 30%. Protective Skill also gives you immunity to snares and immobilizations, but it doesn't provide the speed boost like Race Against Time does. Temporal Guard, which is a morph of Undo, grants minor protection while slotted, reducing damage taken by 5%. So it's one of the best ultimates to keep slotted on front bar. It also triggers Concentrated Barrier passive. Now moving on to passives. You only need to get Clairvoyance and Concentrated Barrier. Clairvoyance reduces the cost of your Psijic abilities by 15%, so you'll want to put points into it if you end up using Race Against Time. Concentrated Barrier gives you a 5000 damage shield whenever you are blocking, if you have a Psijic ability slotted on your bar. The shield recharges when you spend 10 seconds not blocking. It's a passive worth taking, because it'll get triggered by the Temporal Guard. Now moving on to the Undaunted skill line. Blood Altar is super useful in every fight. You don't have to run it yourself, but someone in your group should. It puts minor lifesteal on all enemies in a 28 meter radius, giving allies 600 health every second when they attack them. The best part though is the Blood Funnel synergy, which allies can use when their health is low, to heal for 40% of their max HP. It has a 20-second cooldown, like all synergies. The Overflowing Altar morph makes it even better. Instead of Blood Funnel, it gives the Blood Feast synergy, which heals for 65% of an ally's max health. This can be a lifesaver in many situations. Trapping Webs places a web on the ground that deals damage, slows enemies, and explodes after 10 seconds. The main feature is the Spawn Broodling synergy it gives to ranged allies, which summons a spider. Since the synergy requires allies to be at range, it's pretty situational. It can be used in fights like Asylum Sanctorium, where allies need to stay far away from the boss when kiting, allowing them to actually use the synergy. The Shadow Silk morph makes the summoned spider from the synergy hit harder by adding a damage over time effect. This makes it way better than the other morph. Inner Fire is a ranged taunt with a 28 meter range. It also provides the Radiate synergy, which deals 6% of the user's max stamina or magicka, plus 62% of their weapon or spell damage as flame damage, over 3 seconds. Afterward, it explodes, dealing 10% of their max stamina or max magicka, plus 105% of their weapon or spell damage as flame damage. This makes Radiate the strongest damaging synergy in the game. Inner Fire's damage can also trigger the Encratis' Behemoth monster set. The Inner Rage morph allows 3 people to use the synergy, which translates into lots of damage when your entire group makes use of it. It's also worth recasting this ability early in 12-man content, to allow even more people to use the synergies. The other range taunts, like Destructive Clench and Shield Throw, take priority if your team needs the damage reduction from Major Maim, but Inner Rage can be great in fights with less incoming damage. Also, if you have enough bar space, you could use both of them simultaneously. Necrotic Orb sends an orb forward that deals damage to enemies around it. It also provides a synergy that restores 3960 of an ally's dominant resource when activated. While the synergy is important for resource sustain, as a tank, you likely won't need to use it yourself, since someone else in the group will be using it. However, if no one else runs it, you can provide significant sustain and damage by using it yourself. Energy Orb is a great healing over time ability that doesn't require a specific weapon type, like a restoration staff. Use it whenever your team needs more group healing. Mystic Orb retains the original combustion synergy, instead of changing it into healing combustion, and grants you additional recoveries on top of that. The healing combustion synergy is relatively useless, because people will want to use the synergy immediately to sustain their resources, which means that majority of the times, they'll trigger the healing explosion when the healing isn't needed. Because of that, whenever you don't need the additional healing over time from Energy Orb, you should use Mystic Orb, so your group can deal more damage thanks to the original combustion. Now moving on to the passives. You'll want both of them. The Undaunted command restores 4% of your max health, stamina and magicka whenever you use a synergy. Undaunted Metal increases your max health, stamina and magicka by 2% for each type of armor you're wearing. To get the full benefit of this passive, you'll want to use 5 heavy, 1 medium and 1 light armor piece. Moving on to the Assault skill line. Vigor is a useful skill that provides a 10-second heal over time to you and your allies within an 8-meter radius. It's especially effective in trial settings, where your weapon damage is boosted by other supports. It's also the go-to skill for proccing the powerful Assault set. Echoing Vigor extends the duration from 10 to 16 seconds, and increases the radius from 8 to 50 meters. This morph can work well in fights where tanking is easier, and if you're already getting minor resolve from other sources. Resolving Vigor no longer heals your allies, but provides a stronger heal for yourself over a shorter period. It also grants you the minor resolve buff for 20 seconds, boosting your armor by almost 3000. Since minor resolve is essential for tanking, you'll use this morph most of the time. Rapid Maneuver grants you and your allies within 28 meters Major Expedition for 8 seconds, boosting movement speed by 30%. Keep in mind, this skill has a high cost, using up 6426 stamina without any modifiers. The morph you'll want to use is Charging Maneuver, which not only gives Major Expedition, but also adds Minor Expedition for the duration, boosting movement speed by an extra 15%. The cost is reduced to 6156 stamina as well. This skill is useful in trials, for speeding up the group's movement between trash packs, but it can also be crucial in specific mechanics. For example, in the Lord Falgraven fight, in Kainzegi's trial, it helps your team quickly form a line to transfer a lightning bolt to the boss, to interrupt an ability that could wipe the group. With a 28-meter range, it can cover the entire team, if used at the right moment. Razor Caltrops, which is a morph of Caltrops, applies Major Breach to all enemies inside of it, reducing their armor by almost 6000. Providing around a 13% damage increase. It's extremely good for trash fights. Warhorn is the ultimate you'll use most of the time. It costs 250 ultimate and grants a buff to you and all allies within 20 meters, increasing their max stamina and max magicka by 10%. This translates to roughly a 2.5% damage increase. The aggressive Horn morph not only grants the usual buffs from Warhorn, but also provides Major Force for 10 seconds. This increases your group's critical damage by 20%, giving a huge boost to your team's DPS. Now as for the passives, it's definitely worth putting a point into Continuous Attack for the Major Gallop buff, which increases your movement speed while mounted by 30%. The other passives are strictly PvP related. Now moving on to the support skill line. Propelling Shield, which is a morph of Siege Shield, increases the range of abilities with at least 28 meters range by 7 meters, while you're standing inside the shield. This can be useful in specific encounters, like the Ansel fight in Sanity's Edge, where the extra range is beneficial, so it's extremely situational. Purge is a very expensive ability that will cleanse up to 3 effects from you and your allies within 80 meters. It's extremely useful in some places, such as for example the first boss in the House of Fabrication trial, Hunter-Killer Fabricants. You'll want to use the efficient Purge morph to make the cost a bit more bearable. Guard links you to another group member within 15 meters, transferring 30% of the damage they take to you. This is especially useful in fights where one tank, usually the main tank, takes way more damage than the other tank. The tank with less incoming damage can guard the other to help them survive. Mystic Guard also provides constant minor vitality, which increases healing received and strength of damage shields by 6%, though this buff will most likely already be applied by your healer, using Ozes and the Inferno monster set. Revealing Flare is an extremely important skill for a tank. Activating this skill exposes invisible enemies, which you will rarely find useful in PvE. However, it also passively grants you major protection, decreasing your damage taken by 10%, which is extremely useful. It's essentially trading a skill slot for 10% damage reduction. Barrier Ultimate costs 250 ultimate, and grants you and your allies within 12 meters a large damage shield for 30 seconds. It's the go-to ultimate when your focus is on survivability, rather than boosting DPS with Warhorn. The replenishing barrier morph is usually the better one. The ultimate it generates will allow you to cast the next barrier much faster. Now moving on to the passives. You only need Magicite. It's an extremely good passive that sometimes makes it worth it to frontbar barrier, even when you don't intend to use it, just to boost your magic recovery. Now moving on to the Vampire skill line. Exhilarating Drain, which is a morph of Vampiric Drain, is a 3-second channel that generates 20 ultimate. It can be a great option, but it requires constant channeling, meaning you cannot block. Because of this, it's only an option in easy fights. Mistform allows you to dash ahead and absorb projectiles. It can be very useful in some situations. For example, in Cloud Rest, it can entirely absorb Smaja's heavy attack. And in Sanity's Edge, you can use it to kite Yasela's firebombs. Now as for the passives. Undeath passive reduces your damage taken by up to 15%, based on your missing health. But you need to be a stage 3 vampire to trigger it. However, becoming a stage 3 vampire will increase the cost of your non-vampire abilities by 8%, increase your flame damage taken by 30%, and reduce your health recovery by 60%. While it can have niche uses, it severely impacts your sustain, and should be avoided in fights with flame damage. This is because the game calculates it wrong, additively, so it'll increase your flame damage taken by approximately 30%, instead of 13, depending on other mitigation sources. Other than that, there is also one passive that you'll need, from one of the craft skill lines, specifically from Alchemy. You'll need Medicinal Use passive, to increase the duration of bonuses you gain from potions. Now moving on to skill setups. Keep in mind that the setups I'm going to show you are just suggestions, and some base to build off of. You will always get better results by adjusting for each fight, and in the skill section, I marked every useful skill for you to choose from. All scrubbing skills in this section use these combinations. Taunt, Sage's Remedy and Maim on Shield Throw, Pull, Druid's Resurgence and Cowardice on Wield Soul, Damage Shield, Gladiator's Tenacity and Intellect and Endurance on Ulfsuit's Contingency, Damage Shield, Anchorage's Potency and Courage on Soulburst, and Magic, Assassin's Misery and Heroism on Trample. Starting off with dungeons and with the trash setup. If you don't have access to scribing, you should use Pierce Armor instead of Shield Throw, Unrelenting Grip instead of Wield Soul, and Coagulating Blood instead of Soul Burst. And this is the boss setup. If you don't have access to scribing, you should use Pierce Armor instead of Shield Throw, Destructive Clench instead of Elemental Susceptibility, and Defensive Stance, Revealing Flare, Engulfing Flames, or Heroic Slash instead of Ulfsuit's Contingency. Moving on to Trials. This is the base setup for Trash. The scribing alternatives are the same as in previous setups. And this is the boss setup. Now I'm gonna show you a bunch of example setups, just to show how different your final setup can be from the base setup. This will be my setup for Turvokun. It's a regular dungeon boss setup with Crushing Shock instead of Chain. The fight requires a ranged interrupt, and since it doesn't require a chain, there are adds but they don't have to be chained in, replacing that makes the most sense. Now this will be my setup for Archdruid Devrick. You will need Immovable to survive Devrick's channeled Kona Lightning Breath. Proccing Helping Hands with Ignis Shield will help you sustain blocking. Ignis Shield is also the only skill providing your group with Minor Brutality, by proccing Mountain's Blessing, because this setup does not use Stone Giant. Changing Hardened Armor to Balance improves your magical sustain, and it's worth it, because this fight revolves mostly around direct damage, so damage shields are less optimal. Chains are not needed in that fight, so you can replace them with Ulfsuit's Contingency to gain damage reduction, sustain, and the ability to shield your teammates through the last phase mechanic. Now this would be my setup for main tanking Flame Herald Bassay. Bassay deals massive damage, so getting another 10% damage mitigation from Revealing Flare is crucial. This fight revolves mainly around dots, rather than direct damage, so spamming Hardened Armor is better than spamming Coagulating Blood, so there's no need to slot Coagulating. And you will need Crushing Shock to interrupt Bassay, if she starts her channel while you're repositioning. Now a setup for main tanking Reef Guardian. Your entire build will revolve around keeping up permanent Magma Shell. This is the one fight where going with extremely defensive setup is beneficial to your team, because using Magma Shell build and keeping the bosses still is going to be a bigger DPS increase. than if you were doing the mechanic the intended way, kiting, in a more support-oriented setup. There is no need to use shield throw for its major maim, because Reef Guardians will mostly only hit you, not your teammates, and you'll be in Magma Shell anyway. Exhilarating Drain will allow you to generate enough ultimate for almost permanent Magma Shell. Igneous Shield is the only skill providing your group with minor brutality, because this setup does not use Stone Giant. It will also generate some ultimate by proccing the Mountain's Blessing passive. Trample will provide you with major heroism, helping you keep up Magma Shell. Changing Hardened Armor to Balance improves your magical sustain, and it's worth it because Hardened Armor's damage shield won't add much while you're in Magma Shell anyway. Now this will be a setup for main tanking Tideborn Teleria. Teleria deals massive damage, so getting another 10% damage mitigation from Revealing Flare is crucial. This fight revolves mainly around dots, rather than direct damage. There is decent amount of direct damage, but you'll be dodge rolling the heavy attacks and taking Maelstrom unblocked, because it ticks too fast. So spamming Hardened Armor is better than spamming Coagulating Blood, so there's no need to start coagulating. You can stay completely stationary for a huge part of the fight, so Cinderstorm is a great heal over time option. Now a setup for main tanking Exarchanic Ysaela. In this fight, you will constantly have a hemorrhaging dot that takes for 20% of your max health, that can't be mitigated in any way. Fragmented Shield is a decent option for this fight, since healing is the only way of dealing with hemorrhaging. Elusive Mist is great for kiting firebombs, and Cinderstorm will help you out heal hemorrhaging. Now this will be a setup for main tanking Ansel the Tormentor. You'll want to spam Ulfrid's Contingency to shield your teammates from the poison AoEs, so we'll replace Coagulating Blood with Revealing Flare, which will proc Magicka 8 passive, increasing your magical recovery, and allowing you to spam Contingency more. You'll need Crushing Shock to interrupt Enraged Fragments. We still need Wield Soul to chain the imps, but we don't have any space on backbar, so we'll place it on frontbar. This setup only procs minor brutality with Igneous weapons, which won't be enough, which is why you'll have to replace Ulfrid's Contingency with Igneous Shield to proc it if your group doesn't have another Dragonknight or a Templar. But this is extremely unlikely to happen. Now, moving on to the gear. This is the setup for dungeons for Trash, and this for bosses. And here's a few more options. Use Puncturing Remedy on your front bar if you're using Pierce Armor. Use Vestments of Olrim instead of Powerful Assault if you're playing without a healer, in a 1 tank 3 damage dealers group comp. Turning Tide is a decent alternative for Loosened Echoes. War Machine is a decent alternative for Powerful Assault. Crimson Oath's Rife is also a decent alternative for Powerful Assault, but it will be useless for damage dealers who already brought enough armor penetration on their own. This is the setup for Pugging Trials as a main tank. First the Trash setup, and now the boss setup. This setup is a recommendation for random pack groups. In an organized trial, always listen to what the raid lead wants you to wear, rather than what I'm showing here. Same as last time, use Puncturing Remedy on your front bar, if you're using Pierce Armor. Crimson Oath's Rife has 2 bonus armor lines, which together will grant you 2974 additional armor. This might allow you to shift armor in other parts of your build, like for example switching off of the Lady Mundus, or changing Fortified or Bulwark champion points to something different. Crimson Oath's Rife will be rendered useless if a damage dealer in your group is wearing Alkosh, but it's very unlikely you'll find a damage dealer wearing a support set in a random pack group. And this is the setup for pack trials as an off-tank. First the Trash setup, and now the boss setup. Same as last time, this is just a recommendation, so in an organized trial, always listen to what the raid wants you to wear, rather than what I'm showing here. Once again, use Puncturing Remedy on your front bar if you're using Pierce Armor. Saxo's Champion allows you to provide major force with any ultimate, so you can change your backbar ultimate from Aggressive Horn to Replenishing Barrier or Magma Shell, and you'll only lose out on the Horn resource buff, while providing a defensive ultimate for you and your group. Moving on to champion points. On your blue tree, you should use Ironclad, Duelist Rebuff, Enduring Resolve, and Bulwark. On your red tree, you should use Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Bastion, and Bracing Anchor. If you run Nord with fully golded out gear and proper trades, you will be over the armor cap of these champion points, so you can replace either Bulwark or Fortified. You could replace them with, for example, Focus Mending, Unassailable, Rejuvenation, Shieldmaster, Sustained by Suffering, or Wardmaster. Moving on to race. Nord is by far the best race for tanking, due to the increased armor from Rugged and ulti generation from Stalwart. You can complete any content on any race. You will just have to work slightly harder with other races, and you'll have to adjust your build and get more armor from somewhere else. Now moving on to Mundus. The best Mundus is the Achnak, which increases your magical recovery by 310, and causes your armor pieces with the divine trait to increase it by another 28. If you're struggling with reaching the armor cap of 33,000, then the lady can also be a decent choice. It increases your armor by 2,744. Moving on to attributes. Majority of the times, you should put all your points into health. However, you need your max stamina to be higher than your max magicka, because the combustion synergy restores your dominant resource, and you want it to be stamina. Because of that, you might have to put some attribute points into stamina, if you have passives, such as for example the Gift of Magnus racial, or items with bonuses, such as for example one piece bonus of Encrates' Behemoth, that increase your max magicka. Put just enough points to make your max stamina higher than your max magicka, and then put the rest into health. Now moving on to food. The best food is Orzorga's smoked bear haunch. However, it's extremely expensive, so you should use Jewels of Misrule instead. It provides only slightly lower stats than Orzorga, while being significantly cheaper. As for other useful foods, we have Orzorga's Red Frofgar, which provides more max health and magic recovery, at the cost of providing no stamina recovery at all. Stamina recovery doesn't work while blocking, so it can be a decent option if you're perma-blocking. Bewitched Sugar Skulls provides maximum resources instead of recoveries. It can be decent for fights where you need to block for a very long time during a very specific period, but the pressure is non-existent outside of that specific period, so you can recuperate stamina by heavy attacking freely, like for example Roxa the Warped boss in Balsunar dungeon. The increased maximum resources will also increase the scaling of some of your healing abilities, such as Resolving Vigor. And the last one is Candied Jester's Coin. Provides only max stamina and magic recovery. It can be decent when you want to reduce your max health during a specific phase of a fight. For example in Cloud Rest. You can eat it right as the execute phase starts, because maximum health becomes a detriment due to the Baneful Mark mechanic. Moving on to potions. Most of the time you should use the Tri-Stat potions, which restore health, stamina, magicka, and increase all the recoveries. They will greatly improve your sustain. You can craft them by combining Columbine, Baglos, and Mountain's Flower. There are better potions, but they're extremely expensive, so they're only worth using when you're tryharding for the most difficult achievements, such as Trial Trifectas. Heroism potions can provide 100% uptime on minor heroism buff, which generates ultimate, but they're extremely expensive because they're crafted by combining Dragonrium, Dragon's Blood, and Columbine. And that's it for this video. If you have any more questions, you can comment down below, or join our Discord server Wildheart. As always, feedback will be appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my Twitch. Thanks for watching and see you next time.